Chapter 5. Exciting Discovery. "Is that your ball, Nancy?" George called. "No, it's a piece of brass. I think I found an old plate." "A brass plate!" Bess exclaimed in wonder. Meanwhile, Nancy had pried the object out of the mud and saw that it was not a plate, but a small carved chest. "It looks valuable," she gasped, holding up the article for Bess and George to see. "And it's very heavy." "Nancy, you certainly were born lucky," George remarked. "You lose a golf ball and find a treasure chest." "This feels heavy enough to contain gold," Nancy declared, turning the curious object over in her two hands. She estimated that the little chest was not more than 6 inches in length. It appeared to be approximately 4 inches wide and slightly less in depth. "Open it quickly," Bess urged when Nancy rejoined them. "The chest seems to be locked." "Maybe the lid's stuck," George added. "Let me try." She had no better success. "It's locked all right," Bess declared. "We could try to smash the lid with a rock." "Brass isn't easy to crack," Nancy replied. "Besides, I don't want to ruin such an attractive little chest. It will be beautiful when cleaned and polished." "I'm curious to know what's inside," George interjected. "Any ideas, Nancy?" "Maybe something valuable. The thing that interests me is how did it get here, so close to the haunted bridge?" "Perhaps the scarecrow put it there on his off-duty hours," Bess suggested with a grin. "Ha ha, very funny," her cousin answered. "Sounds like your brain has gone off duty." Bess ignored the comment and remarked, "I'll bet the water washed it down here. The creek evidently was much higher at one time than it is now." "I wonder," said Nancy, "if someone deliberately buried the chest. Possibly the person who set up the scarecrow." "Well, it's too deep a mystery for me," Bess declared, as the girls climbed out of the ravine with their treasure. "Nancy, if you can find the answer to this riddle, you'll be good." "I mean to try at least," the young detective replied with a laugh. The 3 girls soon emerged from the woods. They met no one as they cut across the golf course. But as they approached Deer Mountain Hotel, they saw Martin Bartescu on the terrace. He sat sipping a cool drink under an umbrella at a table. He quickly arose and came toward the girls. Nancy was annoyed. "That pest will be certain to see the chest and ask a million questions about it," she murmured. Bess, who was carrying a sweater, carefully tossed it over Nancy's arm so the object was concealed completely. Before Bartescu could speak, Nancy said hastily, "Thank you for the beautiful flowers." "You liked the roses?" he beamed. "I ordered the best I could get. Of course, the florist shop here at Deer Mountain is not like those in New York or Europe. How are you feeling today?" "Very well, except for my hand. One finger is still pretty useless," Nancy replied. "Do you plan to play in the tournament?" "Yes, if the doctor says I may, and providing I qualify." Bartescu smiled. "Your score was one of the lowest turned in. You qualified easily." "I was hoping to," she said. "Are you competing in the men's tournament tomorrow?" "Oh, yes, and I'm counting on winning the cup," Bartescu announced. "I went out for a practice round this morning and shot a 69. I'm just coming into my game," he boasted. "I doubt if anyone here will be a match for me, unless I go into an unexpected slump." The girls found his bragging decidedly distasteful, but listened politely. "May I treat you to ice cream?" he said as the 4 reached the hotel entrance. He seemed offended when Nancy declined. When the girls gained the privacy of their adjoining bedrooms, Bess chuckled. "At least he didn't see the brass chest." Nancy immediately tried to pry open the chest with a nail file, but the lid would not budge. "We need something with a sharp point," George declared, as she studied the little chest. "If only we had an ice pick or something with a—" Nancy sprang to her feet, her eyes full of excitement. "Why didn't I think of it before?" Without waiting to explain, she dropped the chest into George's lap and ran from the room. She hurried through the hotel lobby to find a tool with which to pry open the lid. As Nancy passed the flower shop, she paused a moment to admire the beautiful display in the window. "It would be nice for me to send Bess and George each a bouquet," she mused. "They admired mine so much. They should have some of their own." She grinned. Impulsively, Nancy entered the shop, where she purchased 2 bouquets to be delivered immediately to her friends. "Shall I include your name?" the clerk inquired politely. "No, just write 'from a friend.'" Nancy knew that Bess and George would recognize her handwriting and thought it would be fun to tease them. She watched as the clerk wrote the message on 2 cards. Nancy picked up one and looked at it curiously. "Your handwriting looks familiar," she said. "I sometimes write cards for my customers. Did someone send you flowers from my shop?" "Yes, I received a dozen roses from a man named Martin Bartescu." "Oh, are you Miss Drew?" "Yes, I am." "I wrote the card that went with your flowers," the clerk recalled. "Mr. Bartescu requested me to do so." "I see," Nancy murmured, without disclosing by her tone that the information had special significance. She paid for the flowers and left. As she passed the registration desk, the hotel clerk motioned to her. "Miss Drew, the tournament chairman asked me to give you this," he said, and handed her a sealed envelope. To her delight, it contained an invitation to enter the official competition. Excitedly, Nancy hurried on to the caddy house, where her golf bag and spiked shoes were. Bess and George were mystified when their friend returned to the cousins' room, holding the shoes and an envelope. "Sharp gear," Bess quipped. "What do you intend to do with those?" Nancy laughed. "Could you ask for a better implement than a spike?" Almost in the same breath, she asked, "Aren't you curious about this too?" She showed them the letter and then turned her attention to the brass chest. Holding it firmly between her knees, she inserted a row of the spikes of one shoe under the edge of the lid, then used the other shoe as a hammer. As she paused for a moment, Nancy remarked, "The lid on this mystery chest is stubborn." Bess said, "Why don't you stop for a while? It's almost dinner time. We should dress." Reluctantly, Nancy agreed. The girls had just finished changing when a boy appeared at the door bearing 2 boxes from the florist shop. "They're for Nancy, of course," Bess sighed wistfully. "Barty is a pest, but at least he's generous." George looked at one of the boxes. "This is addressed to me," she cried in surprise. "There must be some mistake." Nancy thoroughly enjoyed herself as she watched the 2 girls open their boxes. So far, they did not suspect that she had sent the flowers. "Oh, what a lovely bouquet!" Bess exclaimed in delight, putting her face close to the yellow roses in it. "Who could have sent it?" George was peering at the attached card. "From a friend," she read. "And mine is the same," Bess added. "Are you sure you haven't been hiding something from me?" Nancy asked teasingly. The little game went on for some time. Then Nancy's broad smile betrayed her. "Nancy Drew, you sent these flowers!" Bess suddenly accused her. "Well, yes, I did." "It was great of you to do this, Nancy," Bess declared. George thanked her, saying it was a sweet joke, the kind she liked. "I did myself a good turn by visiting the florist. I found out something interesting about Barty." Nancy explained that the girl in the flower shop had written the note which accompanied her roses. "Barty seems to be afraid someone will recognize his handwriting," Bess remarked. "Do you suppose he's a fugitive?" "He seems to have plenty of money and apparently doesn't work," Nancy replied. "Still, it never occurred to me that he might be a criminal." "Why don't you wear one of Barty's flowers, Nancy?" Bess suggested. "It would set off your dress beautifully." "But I don't like him," Nancy protested. "Oh, probably he won't even be in the dining room. Flowers are flowers, Nancy. Here, let me pin a rose on you," George insisted. Nancy finally gave in. She hid the chest under the bed, and the girls left their rooms, each wearing a rose. Since Mr. Drew had not returned to the hotel, the girls planned to eat alone. They were led by the head waiter to a pleasant table near a window. Oh, there's Barty, Nancy murmured to George as she noticed him seated alone at a table nearby. Don't let on you see him. It was impossible to avoid the man, however, because he immediately got up and came over to them. When he saw that Nancy was wearing one of his roses, the glance he bestowed on her was more than just friendly. May I join you? He asked. Then, without waiting for a reply, he seated himself in the empty chair next to Nancy. During dinner, Bartescu enjoyed himself thoroughly. He idled over his food as he recounted his fantastic adventures in Africa. Nancy suspected that he had never been there. Finally, the meal came to an end. With feelings of relief, the girls left the dining room. Bartescu followed. Of course you're staying downstairs for the dancing, he said to Nancy. No, I must see the doctor. He's going to examine my hand again and give his verdict on whether or not I can play in the tournament. You are very courageous. Few players would attempt it with such an injury. Nancy made no comment. She gave a polite smile of farewell and moved away. As Dr. Ackerman examined her injured hand, the three girls waited in anxious silence. He asked Nancy a question or two regarding the pain. Only one finger is stiff now, she replied. Please say I can play. End of chapter 5.